All right, welcome to episode number 73 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast. We are recording on June the 21st, 2020. My name is Eric, the host of the show, based in Southern Ontario, a hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator, and of course, computer geek. As a first responder, I've witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events, and I started a small preparedness company to help people be able to be better prepared and be able to look after themselves for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
My name is Ian, and I live on Vancouver Island. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, sports shooter, and my farm's designated handyman.
My name is Tyler. I live in Northwest Wisconsin. Besides prepping, I also enjoy homesteading, metalworking, engines, guns, and the great outdoors.
All right, want to help support the show and keep the Canadian Prepper Podcast on the air? Buy a Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt at rapidsurvival.com. All proceeds help keep the lights on and the backup generator fueled.
And if you're enjoying the show, please take a few minutes and like us on Facebook or submit a review on iTunes. We want your feedback, good or bad, or if there's a topic you want us to cover, you can email us at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
Right, we've got some divisive content for you in this episode. We're going to start off with some preparedness-related news, and we'll let you know what we've done for our preparedness since the last episode. And then we're going to get into the main topic, Civil War and personal readiness. So some news articles.
All right, well, first of all, happy summer solstice, everybody. It's the longest day of the year, which means it's only going downhill from here. So,
true.
Yeah. So I mean, it's beautiful having this much daylight, but yeah, it's like although the hottest days of the year are usually still to come, but yeah, the days are getting shorter. So it's kind of a sad day for me. It's like the opposite of my winter solstice, which is when the days are getting longer. Anyway, first news article: shooter withdrew huge sum of fire prior to his rampage. So the Nova Scotia shooter is reported here recently that on Maclean's magazine, which is a Canadian magazine here, that the Nova Scotia shooter withdrew $475,000 just prior to his shooting spree from Brinks. So just he picked up a bunch of money. Now, whether or not he's, as part of his personal business, he was a denturist or some sort of shady payoff, it's worth the tinfoil investigation, I think. Interesting enough, also related, his house, in the middle of an active investigation, his house has been torn down and all remnants of his property has been destroyed. So the Atlantic CBTV News reports that basically in order to help the village heal, they just decided to get rid of every scrap of evidence.
Interesting.
I don't know. Take it for what you want.
If your tinfoil hat wasn't already wrapped up tight enough after those two articles, I've got one here from New Brunswick, and it's in regards to the province's plan for a COVID-19 contact tracing app. Thankfully, it was denied by Ottawa. I don't know about anybody else listening, but I'm not a huge fan of contact tracing app. But tighten the tinfoil up. If you do have a phone, which I'm sure pretty much everybody does now, either Android or iPhone. They have silently enabled, or not enabled, but they've pushed out the ability for the phones to track and see where people are and lines things up for these types of apps. So, for example, with your iPhone, if you go into settings and then privacy and then health, you'll see a little thing at the top now that says, hey, COVID-19 tracking. You want to turn this on? It's off by default right now, but, tighten up the tinfoil. And I guess if it's put on there silently and it's off, it could always be flipped on silently as well. So just keep that in mind.
That would be my thought as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that your phone's not tracking you anyways, but
I don't have any specific articles, but I thought I'd just kind of go through the news cycle the past few weeks here in the States, kind of take you through the sequence of events that has probably brought us up to this podcast episode talking about Civil War. So here in the States, we've been experiencing protests, riots, just general civil unrest, pretty much all over the United States, at least in all of the major metropolitan areas. Ever since the death of George Floyd, I spoke about that a few weeks ago on the podcast. Just as those were kind of starting to die down, we had another police killing. It was on the night of June 12th. It was Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed by an Atlanta police officer after an altercation at a Wendy's drive-thru. So basically what happened is the Wendy's called the police department, said this gentleman was passed out in the drive-thru. Police show up, they wake him up, get him out of the car, start questioning him. This goes on for about 20 minutes. He finally agrees to a breathalyzer. He blows a 0.1, which is just above the legal limit of 0.08. Cops go to arrest him. He starts to resist, somehow manages to wrestle basically both cops to the ground, proceeds to grab one of their tasers. and then takes off running from the cops. And then as the cops begin to follow or pursue him, he turns around to shoot the cops with that taser, and then they shoot him fatally in the back. So again, it was a black gentleman, white cop, so it's kind of just fueling the fire of the Black Lives Matter protests and all that going on. So I guess the big thing coming out of this that I'm seeing as it relates to civil war is kind of the Democrats, the left is calling for defunding or dismantling the police. And and just going back to that Rayshard Brooks case, so I think it was the Atlanta Attorney General or whoever in the police department decided to charge that cop with 11 separate charges, one of which is felony murder. So amongst this, they're not getting the cops aren't getting any support from the departments, and then the left is calling to defund and dismantle the police. A lot of police officers are beginning to just call in, walk out, or resign altogether. There's an entire SWAT team in Florida that resigned. There's been cops in Atlanta now resigning. Even in Minneapolis, I believe they had 7 or 8 officers resign within the past few weeks. Amongst all that, the book burning has also begun. So we're seeing a lot of monuments being torn down, basically destroying history, even monuments of like Christopher Columbus and George Washington. Starting to be torn down throughout the states. And just last night in Minneapolis, we had a shooting. 12 people were shot. 1 was killed in Minneapolis just this past night, Saturday night. So lots of unrest going on out there. Lack of policing. It seems like a lot of these Democratic governors and mayors are kind of just withdrawing the police from these areas and letting these criminals basically run about and tear these towns to nothing. Which is unfortunate.
It's kind of funny when a few years ago, like RoboCop and The Purge were like solid fiction when the cops would go on strike or they'd have a one day without police services, and now we're getting to the real life version, aren't we?
Yep, no kidding.
It's like just like one bad egg spoiling the bunch. It's like just like firearms owners or anything else. It's like you can't judge the actions of a few by the whole group or with the whole group. But yeah, it's getting pretty silly now. So.
Yeah, I think there's 800,000 police officers in the United States. Of course, there's going to be a few that don't live up to the oath and everything else. And all we can do is try to legislate and regulate basically get them people out of the departments, because an overwhelming majority of the police officers in this country are great. They're out there to do nothing but protect us. It's unfortunate that they get spoiled because of a few bad apples.
Well, the funny thing is they're calling to defund the police, but they're also asking for body cams, which, if I recall correctly, is going to cost money. So I don't know how they're going to do both. So.
Yep.
Yeah, that's quite the significant investment.
Yeah, it's no small investment. Not to mention the fact that it's not exactly a perfect system either. And then the fact is that really is it going to prevent anything or change anything? No, because I mean there's arguments to be made about both the Floyd case and the Rayshard Brooks case about who is right, who is wrong, because there's more to the story behind that before the cameras get turned on. Also, when the cameras are on, not a lot of people saw the whole videos with a lot of those things. And so there's definitely multiple sides to the arguments.
Exactly.
It's weird. The media only showed a little bit of a clip of a video, not the whole thing.
Probably the most inflammatory part, I would think. Yeah.
I'm just going to say, it doesn't help when you have a media that's pushing just one side of the story pretty much. So. Yeah,
so unfortunately, and that's what I guess we'll get to later, is that they're not helping. So
that's right.
No.
So just kind of, I think I spoke about it a few weeks ago. There was a chicken ordinance that was trying to go through in Amory. So it was actually just passed here in Amory. I just wanted to take you guys through. So as people are allowed to burn and tear down statues, monuments, loot, riot, this is what you're supposed to do to legally get chickens in Amory here. So the ordinance became legal June 10th. No roosters, maximum of 5 hens, a waste plan requirement, and coop and fences are needed. Requires permission from neighboring properties. Residents can legally purchase poultry once they submit a license form and fee of $35. Also needed is a coop drawing form, neighborhood approval form, and chicken keepers must pass on-site coop inspection. An annual license renewal and fee required. So I think that's where you get a lot of division. As part of the country is subjected to these sorts of ridiculous regulations, in my opinion, to own chickens. I mean, come on. And then you look on the news and people are just committing crimes left and right, and there's no accountability. So
Yeah, I think I'll quote the other podcast in line when they say a permit is a fee you pay to buy your rights back from the government.
Yeah, no kidding. I couldn't help but laugh when I just quick read through that, so thought I'd share.
Yeah.
And wow.
Like a waste management plan. I just laugh about that. I'm like, I'm gonna take a shovel, I'm gonna pick up the poop, and I'm gonna throw it on a pile.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, do I need blueprints for the chicken coop? Do I need to call in the EPA and do any sort of like ecological impact?
The whole annual inspection thing, like, so they're gonna send someone out to inspect your chicken coop?
Apparently.
Well, and I'm pretty sure that person's not gonna do it for free. So they're either going to charge you for an inspection, or they're going to be employed by the city, in which case that's a 6-figure a year probably salary or something. And
are they going to assist with the disposal of the poop while they're there?
I guess it is not written out in the article, so I can't say for sure. But maybe it's a new job opening for me. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at this all wrong.
Yeah, if they leave their back door of the car open, they'll be collecting some poop. But
oh boy.
Anyways, that's all I've got for news this week. So.
Wow.
Interesting. So are you going to keep chickens?
I will be having chickens, yes. But I will not be subjected to those. That's just within the city limits. So fortunately, I'm outside those. And even if I'm not going to be taken to those.
Section out for you, but if you're outside the limits, I'll leave it in. Yep. All right. So we move into what we've done lately for preps. So for myself, we've got a little project going on. I think I've talked about it a few times on the show. We're starting to fill in a pond in behind the property and regain quite a nice chunk of our property that we can then obviously use for other things besides a mosquito infestation. So I was able to find a company that is willing to come and fill it all in and set all the grading up in the backyard and make it look all nice. And it was for the awesome price of free.
Ooh,
so
nice.
Can't go wrong there. They're floating the bulldozer in tomorrow, and then the trucks start showing up to start filling it in, and I get to sit back on the back deck, crack a beer, and watch them do their thing.
Doesn't get any better than that.
No, it was. It's the best Facebook Marketplace post I have put up yet. I was expecting to get a little bit of fill here and there and have to do all the work over the summer, and nope, not anymore. They're bringing all the machines and everything, and I just need to sit back and watch them do it.
Nice.
So I'll put some pictures up when it's done. I'll do some before and after photos so everyone can see. But
awesome.
Should be good. And besides that, I have been on the road a ton for work. So But
yeah. I know how you feel. So I was up on the road for work as well. But luckily, the nice thing is about that is that work allowed me to have 45 hours in the Toronto area. So because Eric didn't want to meet up with me, so I I decided to go meet up with Alan. So I with my Gavin from Patriot Podcast, we drove down to Southwestern Ontario, and we went to Alan's place for a barbecue. It was fantastic. So I got to meet him face to face.
Well, I was in Eastern Ontario. I get it.
Yeah. Well, you had your chance anyway. But Benny from Patriot
opposite side of the map.
That's right. So Benny from Patriot Podcast came along. So the four of us got to meet up, and that was the first face-to-face with Benny as well. And so great. We got to exchange some ideas, do a little tour of Alan's Doomstead, and it was great. So it was always nice to do that. Let's see here. So once I got back from work, I ordered some reloading supplies while at work and got to pick them up while I was here. A couple CGN deals, of course, and then not much else, just because, like I said, kind of prepping the house for a potential sale. And just trying to, actually, I did do something just before the show. I did arrange for some boarding of the alpacas if I do transfer properties. So that was
Are they coming with you?
Yeah, they're coming with us, and it's going to be actually one of our listeners is going to end up boarding the alpacas, which is kind of cool.
Awesome.
So yeah, that is good, and I got a Canadian Prepper Podcast price deal on that, so that was pretty good.
Beautiful.
So that'll help with the transition rather than having to race from one property to another. You just got a nice neutral third spot, and you can just take your time between moves, and that way the most sensitive part of the move, which is the livestock, gets taken care of. So
yeah, makes it a little easier on them too, I'd imagine. So
well, a little less stress on us, and that way you're not worried about trying to move during wintertime or anything else. So yeah, it's all good. So that was pretty much it for me.
Nice. Yeah, for me, since last podcast, went through, planted the garden, so we've got everything in the ground growing now. Most of it's looking pretty good. Got a few things that didn't come up, so we've replanted those, and been busy working the garden, tilling, watering, all that fun stuff. Probably the biggest project I've done the past few weeks. So we had two sheds on my parents' old hobby farm that I grew up on. We've since moved those onto my property now, so we transported a 10 by 16, and I believe the other one is 10 by 12, but it's got kind of an odd 4-foot overhang on the one side. So I spent a few days getting those loaded up on the flatbed trailer with the skid loader, and then early mornings driving over to mom and dad's, and then following them here with that on the trailer, get them unloaded and everything else. So once we got those on the property, I went through the first shed, which was our old chicken coop that we used all while I was growing up, and gutted the thing out. Went through, pressure washed it all up, put some new rubber mats down. Then I went through, painted the inside, painted the outside. Basically looks like a brand new shed now. So figured it lasted 20 years. Hopefully it'll last me another 20. So got that all done, and I'll be doing the same thing with the other shed. So the little shed I just finished is going to be kind of my garden shed, where I'll keep the shovels and rakes and chainsaw, weed whip, all that fun stuff. And then the other shed will be for poultry, and then we're planning on doing some meat rabbits in there as well. So I'll be getting going on that in the upcoming week. Also spent a couple days stacking hay for my father-in-law. Kind of worked out a verbal agreement with him. Going to help him stack hay in the hay mow, and he's going to give us some hay next, I guess either this fall or next spring when we get some goats here. So we also we got a kayak last fall. We took that down the river a couple times here. That was pretty fun. And then just today for Father's Day, I went up to my parents' new property and helped them clean up a big brush pile they had, tear out some fencing. So I got some T-posts and some firewood coming my way in return. So that's what I've been up to.
Nice.
Oh, this is your first Father's Day too, isn't it, Eric?
It sure is.
Yeah, it is.
Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day to both of you.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. So.
I'm drinking my Father's Day gift right now. So
very nice. Ooh,
wow.
let's move into the main topic then.
Yeah. All right. So I guess just talking on Civil War, I think the big reason that people kind of scoff or laugh at the idea of a second Civil War is they kind of try to think about the first Civil War, whereas pretty clear divisions of the North and the South. And when you think of it in terms like that, it's pretty obvious that's probably not going to happen. But I think a second Civil War here in the States is probably going to look more like small pockets or insurrections, occupied zones kind of throughout the country as different little rebel groups or militias, political activists, whatever you might want to call them, kind of try to take over and occupy certain parts throughout the country. I think there's more than two competing interests at play here, I guess.
Well, yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Like you think about rather than a civil war where you got, cannons and, infantry lining up to shoot each other at point blank range and stuff. It's definitely more like along the lines of, breakdown of Yugoslavia back in the 90s, like when they went from like a nice little united country to everybody, dividing along, religious, ethnic, language lines and everything else. And there wasn't exactly just two sides. There was like 15 sides. Yep. And from a Canadian perspective, we had a bunch of our troops over there during the breakdown of Yugoslavia. And it was a mess, right? And there's a guy named, was it Furfal? No, sorry, just dropping the guy's name. Anyways, he did a whole series on the breakdown of Yugoslavia there. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. So, I mean, yeah, it's not a traditional war like you would think, right?
Yep. Yeah, and just kind of what we're seeing, like if you look into Seattle, you probably heard of the CHAZ or CHOP. So originally it was CHAZ, which is the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and then they renamed it to CHOP, which is Capitol Hill Organized Protest. So that's basically, I think it's like 6 square blocks of downtown Seattle, Washington that I'm not sure exactly who is taking over. I believe it's Antifa. But they've basically set up barriers. They're keeping cops out. They overtook the precinct. And this is now basically like they're trying to call it a street festival or community. And yeah, that's I think is what we're going to see is like small pockets of controlled city downtown areas. It might be power plants. It might be like sanitation, water sanitation centers or even sewer sanitation centers. I think it'd be small pockets of, whether it's political activists trying to take over those areas to help either control certain things and get some leverage, and try to negotiate or like hold hostage, for lack of a better term, I guess. And yeah, kind of like what you touched on, Ian, it's not going to be a line of people with cannons and muskets. It's going to be guerrilla urban warfare tactics, and I think it's it's not a secret to anybody that there are a lot of civilian-owned firearms in the United States. 40% of Americans live in households with at least one firearm. U.S. civilians alone account for 393 million of the worldwide total civilian-held firearms, which is about 46%. So this means that there are about 120 firearms for every 100 residents here in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's lots of guns out there. It's not going to be, and these aren't the old muskets that we saw in the first Civil War. So
well, and very few of them, with the exception of California, New York, or actually maybe Illinois, are registered. Right. I mean, the vast majority of these are they were bought, then they were sold a few times, and who knows where they are and who has them, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Before I forget, so the guy's Yugoslavia, his name was Selko Bergovic, and so he did an entire series on the breakdown of Yugoslavia and the shit hit the fan situation he went through. Mm-hmm. So if you want like a kind of a primer for this episode, I guess go see Selko's writings. They were actually put out about 15 years ago, but they still hold true today.
Yeah, I've heard some of his articles read on other podcasts, and they're good stuff. So lots of civilian-owned firearms here in the States. Meanwhile, the U.S. military boasts a total active strength. So this is as of February 28th, 2019. There are 1,359,000 service members with an additional 800,000 people in the 7 reserve components. So what is that? A little over 2 million, basically military members working for the United States government.
Just 1 or 2.
What's that?
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people, right? Yeah, that's a lot of people. And as the lines get muddy, and like I talked, you have not just North and South. It's going to be potentially dozens of different little pockets or different little groups fighting for control. Where do those service members, where does their loyalty really lie? At what point do they split off from the military and go back to fight for their own city or town or their own causes, that sort of thing?
Well, even more so than that, not just the military, but I mean, back in the Obama administration and up to the current one as well, they were buying some massive amounts of ammunition for everything from the Department of Homeland Security, and not more so than they would need for training, but also the Postal Service and agriculture inspectors and everything else. They were arming the living daylights of all these government employees, and you had to wonder why, right?
Yep.
You can kind of see where maybe the long-term thinking was on that one, but
So who knows with that? The U.S. has such a huge budget. In 2019 alone, there was $693 billion in funding for the DoD, which is the Department of Defense, for overseas contingency operations and the war on terrorism. And then outside of direct DoD spending, the U.S. spent another $218 to $262 billion on defense-related programs such as Veteran Affairs, Homeland Security, nuclear weapons maintenance, and other Department of Defense stuff. So there's a lot of money out there in terms of military power, even civilian firearms, ammunition, everything else. With everything going on in the country right now, it seems like the tinderbox is kind of full. It seems like all the puzzle pieces are there, and the wheels are kind of in motion with all the riots and protests going on. And now we see a autonomous zone popping up in Seattle, and nothing's really being done about that. So I just wonder if other groups or militias throughout the country are kind of getting a little encouragement or a little confidence with kind of how that's being handled.
Well, the problem is I think I'll use the term oath keepers, but anyways, you've got guys that swore an oath to the Constitution of the U.S. Other guys that will just blindly follow orders from whoever happens to be in charge at this point, regardless if it's constitutional or not. We've got the same problem in Canada because we have troops that sign a oath of allegiance to the Queen, but there's other guys who just follow blindly a politician's word, or what they feel is their personal best opinion. So it's not just the military itself. The military is going to have factions as well, and that applies to ours as well as yours, right?
Yeah, and you see that kind of all the time here too. Even in certain states, as legislators pass gun laws, you'll hear sheriffs coming out and saying, "Yeah, we're not going to enforce these laws; they're unconstitutional." So right there is kind of an open face, I guess, division or contrast between the two departments that should be on the same page working together, but.
Yeah, we've got a listener here, Todd, who has a valid point. He just says the question is, will it spill over into Canuckistan?
Well, I think you're going to be caught in the middle, because if we have a bunch of foreign interests, which we can get into when I start talking my piece there too, could be part of the problem, because if the U.S. is feeling that we're not helping, that we could easily find ourselves being caught in the middle between two other opposing powers too, just by proxy even.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another message here from Terry, also listening, and absolutely that's what we're trying to do with our background images. Stir the pot. Since hi fellows, love the images of firearms in Ian and Eric's background. Are you guys trying to give Justin and Blair a meltdown?
Oh, so funny story, actually. I was talking to my dad for a pre-Father's Day call, and he goes, you're a pretty private guy. I'm surprised you'd show off all those firearms you have in the background. I was like, I wish I had all these. But, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess just talking maybe like some civilian options for, let's say it does come to civilians versus the government, or even just speaking, more broadly than the firearms that the civilians here in the United States do have. We have tannerite. I don't know if is that available in Canada? Can you just go to the store and buy that like you can here in the States?
Yep.
Okay. So tannerite's certainly an option there. Drones are also could be weaponized and used pretty easily. And then kind of like I touched earlier, the biggest thing is going to be for these militias, they're going to be looking to control or kind of hold hostage key areas. It's going to be your power plants, your farms, your water and sanitation plants, maybe like critical bridges, things like that. And they're going to be basically trying to hold those areas hostage for leverage, whether it be political or to get food or ammunition or whatever it might be from other places. That's assuming things were to really collapse, but.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
The thing about tannerite too is it's fairly safe to store until you actually mix the two components, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep. Until you mix the two, it's safe to store, safe to transport. So yeah, you can just buy it right on the shelf here. Go to Fleet Farm. It goes on sale all the time. It's like $14.99 for a little couple pound charge, I think it is. So fun stuff, definitely.
Sorry, did you mention the drones already?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you just cut out there for a second. The reason I was going to ask about that is because the drones thing. I mean, you look what damage they've been able to do with drones in civil conflicts, like between the Yemenis and the Saudis right now. A couple of drones flew into a refinery, caused millions and millions in damage. So, from a cost efficacy thing, it was huge, right? So, civilian access, and yeah, it's a thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, you guys. I think you guys cut out again there. Did you guys did the control thing as well?
Yeah. Sorry, I can barely hear the audio. It's really bad on my end.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I covered off control and like hold areas and key sectors as well.
All right, cool. So, anyways, a couple interesting thing is like again, can it spill over Kazakhstan? A couple things I had noticed recently is that the Canadian government, by coincidence or just by bad timing, last couple of years they've been really clamping down on, for example, civilian access to radios, and being a little more stringent on access to radios. Body armor, another thing. It's getting tougher and tougher to find that. Firearms, as we noticed recently, they've been doing a lot more banning.
Yep.
So obviously they're trying to limit access to tools of the trade, so to speak. So is that coincidence, or is that just a normal ongoing evolution of the country? I don't know, but it's obviously if the government's concerned about it, if they're concerned about civilian firearm ownership, that's probably a concern to me.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see them all of a sudden over the years just jump into all of a sudden radios, and specifically the Baofeng radio was can't have that anymore. Thou shalt stop selling it for rapid survival, and then it's just all of a sudden when it was readily available pretty much anywhere before, and all of a sudden it's been nixed. I can see where it fits in the Radio Communications Act, but they really didn't care before, and suddenly they do a lot.
Well, I think it's because it's very capable little radio. It does marine band, it does the FRS bands and everything else. So it is a very handy little tool. But so yeah, as far as other things that could cause something like this to happen in Canada, food shortages. We were talking about that with the COVID thing. whether it's just accessibility from overseas suppliers, just to clamp down on the ability to produce food here in Canada. That's a problem. The media polarization. So we kind of touched on that briefly in the podcast earlier on here. No doubt, every media is biased, including ours, right? But
get out of here.
Yeah, seriously. But they tend to actually not help things when they tend to stick to their own narrative and not either try and present a balanced point of view, or they might intentionally omit stuff just to rile up their audience. That's not helping. So whether it be in the U.S. or in Canada here, it's certainly, I think it's getting more pronounced over the last couple of years, and certainly since the COVID thing has come out, I've noticed a real big thing where people will watch their media of choice, whatever they tend to digest, and they take it as absolute truth. And if you have a different opinion, they don't want to discuss it. They just want to tell you how wrong you are and how could you, like, basically there's no intelligent dialogue anymore.
Yeah, I think that's become probably the biggest issue here in the States, is you have an overwhelming majority of the media that is very left, and just like you said, Ian, it doesn't seem like there's any middle ground or there's any drive for debate. People don't want to reason and argue and try to rationale things. It's just, nope, you're wrong because this, and there's just it seems like there's no hope for people to try to struggle through issues and try to come to agreements and compromises.
Well, yeah, and I mean, so people get so entrenched in their opinion that basically it's like they almost get trigger loaded, so that anytime something happens, whether they, for example, they're anti-gun and the thing in Halifax happened, and people just take that opportunity to not just violently explode with their belief structure, whether they be the people in charge of making laws or in the media or whatever, and without even getting all the facts, they just immediately jump on there about how they need to defund the police or whatever, and it doesn't. Until you get all the facts, there's no point in exploding. But people have lost that rational dialogue ability, I think.
Right.
So now, again, whether you want to call it tinfoil or reality, but I think no doubt in the States, but also in Canada to an extent, outside influences. Now, whether you want to call it like Russian hackers or Russian bots during the last election, or if you want to call it, media payoffs by the government, like we have state-run media here in Canada, the CBC, that gets $600 million spread out to media outlets in Canada, on a whim by the government, basically to set out the good word. But there's also like foreign influence. We can have a lot of media that can be like owned by foreign people or influenced by such, that if they really want to stir up trouble in a country to make it easier to get capital investment in there, or just weaken their own enemy. For example, like, it's in China's and Russia's best interest to have the U.S. like tearing itself apart. That's not helping, right? So as far as like a civil war being possible, yeah, and it's probably not being helped because that wouldn't be the first country in history to have outside people trying to like stir up stuff in the country. Like that was, well, no offense, Tyler, but that was kind of the U.S. playbook for like 60 years. Right? Like, no, yeah, seriously, yeah. So I mean, whether it be exporting democracy or whatever have you, I mean, we could talk about the British partition of India. We could talk about the Vietnam thing. We could talk about all these other places, like even Central America. I mean, there's always like outside influences trying to do war by proxy, right. and not even just war, but just like trying to destabilize a regime in order to encourage regime change. We saw it happen in Ukraine. We saw it happen in Iraq, Iran. Not so much Iran lately, but anyway, I mean, yeah, it's just been it's a historical thing, right? So, and so like we mentioned Yugoslavia before, I mean, that's your poster child for civil wars, because that it went from basically being the poster child of communism in the 90s, and they actually hosted the Olympics in '84 in Sarajevo, and they had like basically the entire city was built up beautifully to host the Olympics, and like less than 10 years later, the thing was in rubble because they had like factions sitting in the hillside shelling the entire town. Too bad Colin wasn't here, because I think he was involved with a little bit of that, not the shelling, but the peacekeeping. But the so it was like it's amazing how it went from like peaceful and harmonious to just torn apart in the space of a few years. And I think that boiled down to trying to break up communism, the economic results of communism, and everything else. It was a mess. And people that were like living next door to each other, within a couple of years were shooting each other. So it never say never, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of the division here too. I mean, you've got like Bernie Sanders was basically campaigning openly on communism, and I mean, we fought a Cold War in this country for how many decades? It was basically communism versus capitalism. So we're kind of seeing those same ideologies pop up again, and it's looking like maybe the same feud once again.
Well, nothing persists like a bad idea, right?
No kidding.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, true communism has never been tried, so let's give it one more try. Right?
Right. Well, and then you combine that with tearing down historical monuments and literal book burning in some places. It's like they're erasing history, and of course that's what it's there for, is to learn from. And we've already done this. We've already tried this in other places. It doesn't work. So.
No, I mean, and the funny thing is, like, half those statues they were tearing down were actually Democrats. So
right, yeah,
make me giggle. But anyway, I mean, we got the same thing here in Canada too. I mean, like, yeah, we had some politicians that were pretty crappy people in general, but they also did some good things. But it's very selective with what they're deciding to tear down, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, we've had slave owners that still have a university named after them, and we have people that might be the parent of the current prime minister that also oversaw the residential schools and had people have no problem with that. So,
yep.
Which was also an issue. So yeah, no, it's definitely a very lopsided approach to civil discord, I guess. But anyway, a couple other things I want to mention too. Is like, so as far as like dealing with a civil war, if you find yourself caught in one, there's no easy answers, right, for anything. Generally, if you don't pick a side, with your neighbor that might, think that, party X is the enemy or people X are the enemy. If you don't agree with them, you're automatically their enemy. And the problem is if you pick the other side, or if you don't, pick the other side, then you're an enemy to them. So if you try and stay neutral, you're just going to be an enemy to everybody. And so that kind of leaves you in the lurch with no support network. So the best thing you can possibly hope for, I guess, is a gray man approach to it. But that's not always easy to do either, right?
Right. And it's tough because
a really tricky situation.
Yeah, and you don't really have control over which militia or faction pops up in your area and starts to take over. Or, you might have to change ideology or kind of adapt. If you want to stay gray man, or like you pick one side or the other, and maybe you have to be strategic. Maybe you don't really conform to either side, but this side's going to win, or they've got more resources. So it'd get messy.
Yeah, well, compromising morals or belief structures just to stay alive. It's like, sometimes you do what you got to do, but there's no winners in civil wars for sure, really.
No.
That's really all I had about that. As far as preparations go, what can you do to prepare for it? Really, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen.
6 through the 72.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty safe to say that you're going to have compromise to your deliveries, structures, and all of that. Food shortages, kind of the same stuff we always talk about for other emergencies or instances. Have food, water on hand, all those sorts of things. I think probably the biggest threat is electricity or an attack on the power grids. That's probably the most immediate threat, in my opinion, or kind of the biggest bang for your buck if you were a militia or something like that trying to attack or create discourse. So.
Well, absolutely. If you are seriously hell bent on destroying a country, what's the first thing you can do is cut the power,
right?
Cut their ability to communicate. So whether it be the interwebs or anything else, but I mean, the internet's an easy target. So the power grid, internet kind of goes out by proxy, and you cut a couple supply lines, and that's not a big deal to do. And before you know it, you've got like anarchy going on. So I guess if you're going to prepare for a civil war, is like plan on some hostile forces doing that to you, I guess.
Yep.
Because
absolutely,
that is a pretty easy step to take. And I think that Selko actually in his writings he did mention the fact that when he's sitting there in Sarajevo, it was only a year that he had the shit at the fan situation, but it was a year basically where they had zero food coming in.
Yikes.
So it's kind of like the siege of Leningrad type of thing. Is they had to kind of constantly root through the root cellars of people that had already died in shelling to see if they had any food left, and kind of go from wreck to wreck, and it was a mess.
Yikes. If we've learned anything from COVID, stock up on toilet paper well in advance.
Yep.
Yeah. What else are you going to prep for?
I know. Figured I'd throw that one out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, like, it's a touchy subject, but I mean, Todd brings up a good point that we are ethnically ghettoized. I mean, as much as our politicians do like to spout off the diversity is a strength type of thing, the problem is the minute they say, white cop kills black man, instead of just saying cop kills man or whatever, then they start mentioning colors. They're either trying to like pigeonhole you or make you choose a side.
Yep.
That if they actually stop mentioning it, actually Morgan Freeman did a great thing on a talk show once. I watched him once. He's like, if you want to stop racism, stop mentioning the fact that I'm black, and I'll stop mentioning the fact that you're white, and we'll just carry on.
Yep.
Yeah. Which I think kind of we're our own worst enemies when we start mentioning like I'm German Canadian or I'm whatever. It's like I mention it. But anyway, it's my 2 cents.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, right. That's pretty much it, eh?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Shall we move into the podcast challenge?
Well, I couldn't think of a good podcast challenge for this one. I said start a civil war. Well, maybe not. that would be a challenge to take. Yeah.
Maybe not in your best interest.
Maybe not. So I guess best podcast challenge is think about what somebody could do to disrupt your life to the max, and of course, so plan to survive a civil war by stealth, evacuation, defense, or any means necessary. But in reality, that just means continue prepping. So I mean, didn't have much of a podcast challenge this week.
Yeah, I think this is one of those scenarios that you need to be very widely prepared. You can't just kind of prepare for one scenario and be ready for also the Civil War. This is kind of like on lines with the EMP or nuclear fallout, those sorts of things. You kind of got to have all of your ducks in a row. You kind of need to have food and water and electricity and defense and fortification. Yeah,
there's no easy answer for all this. So
no,
but watch the news. It's going to progress, and either it'll get better or get worse. So
yep, that's true.
It's true. All right, let's move to upcoming events.
All right, so we've been mentioning TACON for a bunch of shows lately. I did send a message off to the TACON coordinators, and no answer yet. But I think Ontario is still under, I can't remember what phase they call it, but basically they're not allowing gatherings of more than 50, right?
More than 50 for weddings and funerals, if I remember correctly.
So I think
besides that, you're allowed to have a little social bubble of 10 people. But yeah, TACOM right now under the regulations, and I think it would be in Mississauga, which is still in phase 1. Yeah, no.
So I'd say it's safely on hold for now until the COVID procedures allow gatherings of large people. So we'll hold off on that. We'll wait to hear back from Fred and the crew. But yeah, that's our only upcoming event.
Well, it gives us more time to save up for the internet.
Yep. Which is not cheap.
We'll move in. No.
Yeah.
Stick to the tune of almost $700 for the weekend. But yeah. So that's more than double what it costs to run this show for the year. Anyway, we'll move to shoutouts. So I've got one here for Merbium for the awesome meme that she made us a couple of weeks ago. I posted it up on the Facebook page and then, of course, decided to neglect everybody and not show up to last week's show. So you get to show this week.
Awesome.
You guys were ruthless, by the way.
Not that bad. Could have been worse. We haven't even picked on Alan yet, really. We really should, but anyway.
Payback, yeah. No, he stood up for me at the end. So no.
That's right. I got a shout out for Alan and Gavin for their hospitality. Like Alan was great to have us over for dinner, and Gavin basically was my personal driver for the couple of days, and didn't want to take anything in exchange. And I felt really bad, but he was excellent. I mean, we got to go around and do some good networking, so it was fantastic. So thanks to both those guys for their hospitality.
Awesome.
Tyler, anybody?
Nothing for me, no.
All right, cool.
We'll move into email and iTunes reviews then.
Okay, so a couple things. I actually need some feedback from the listeners on this one. So I mentioned the Martin Hartwell story last week briefly in passing about how he ate a nurse and I didn't want to talk about it. Actually, a couple of guys asked me about it and wanted me to talk about it. So if anybody's interested in talking about a survival story, let me know, because it's actually a very fascinating one. It happened back in the 70s. Yeah, so if anybody wants to hear about it, let me know. We can make a podcast episode out of it, but I'm kind of trying to gauge interest because it goes as far as cannibalism. So, but true Canadian story. Last, I also mentioned the fact that on the island, last episode, I think I mentioned that I get a bunch of free stuff off tourists. I just want to clarify that means I'm not stealing it from them. Because somebody asked me, I was like, no. You don't understand. It falls off their vehicle into the ditch, literally. So a lot of times I'm actually driving down the only island highway. Like there's only one road up and down the island. And before these guys get on the ferry, they're usually rushing to get down there and driving they've stolen their vehicles and stuff. And I don't know how many times I found propane tanks, coolers, whatever in the ditch, just falling off these vehicles. And it's just laying there in the trash. So yeah, I end up usually picking it up because it's trash removal too. So yeah, so I'm not stealing off tourists, just so we're clear.
All right, so all I heard is you are stealing off of tourists, and I vote that we now defund Ian.
Oh, dang, see? There you go, that media, that media bias again.
Oh, jeez. So we do have one email that's come in from Greg. It just says, episode 71 was great. It was a great show, guys. It got me thinking for sure. And do you guys ever think of doing a martial arts episode? I consider it a pillar of my preparedness.
Did we not do one?
Does anybody on the panel do martial arts or anything?
X, like I used to. Yeah. But no, I thought we covered it, didn't we?
I don't think we've done like specifically a full episode on martial arts. I think we've kind of touched on a little bit here and there as to what would be good for self-defense. But I don't think we've done like a full in-depth episode. Yeah, we can do that. It's
certainly an excellent self-defense skill set to have. I mean, there's really nothing better in my opinion.
Yeah, no, we'll cover that off, Greg. No problem.
Yeah, I was thinking for a second there, it'd be kind of tricky to do on a podcast, but the more I thought, and we can just discuss like the differences between different ones and what would be good versus not so great for different scenarios. So, so if you're a martial arts expert, you want to come on the show?
I draw the line. I draw the line of doing a kata live on camera, though. Not doing it.
Oh boy! I think everybody appreciates that.
No worries. I got one from TGY TV, Tim Gilby. I don't know how to pronounce that one. That's the best I can do. He mentions that we were talking about our 5-gallon bucket challenge. He says Dollar Tree sells garlic pepper in the spice section. It tastes great on everything. It would make make a good spice to toss in the 5-gallon bucket. Good point. Yeah, it's like curry powder, the garlic pepper, same idea. Whatever your favorite spice is, doesn't weigh much, doesn't take up much room, but you could pretty much eat a skunk's behind if you have the right spices on it, right? So
they make everything taste good.
Yeah,
cheap and light.
Yeah, and unlike hot sauce, won't freeze. Probably lasts forever if it's dehydrated. So yeah, good call for sure, Tim. Thanks.
Nice. All right, we'll move into some iTunes reviews. So we are up to 55 5 stars. We got 5 4 stars, 2 3 stars, 1 2 star, and still that one little guy keeping us honest. So, and no new written reviews. We haven't had a written review since February the 26th. So if you want to throw one in there, I'll read it, good or bad. And with that, I'll bring episode number 73 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or of course your favorite podcast app. Please help us out. Submit a review. It, of course, helps other people find us.
Yeah, we record these shows live on Facebook and YouTube. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel Canadian Prepper Podcast and click on the notification tabs. That gives you alerts when we're going live. If you got any questions or advice for me, you can email into the show at tyler@prepperpodcast.ca.
All right, you can reach Ian directly by emailing me at theislandretreat@gmail.com. And you can also find me on Canadian Patriot Podcast on iTunes and YouTube. And you'll find us discussing why government waste makes me want to pick a side. We record on Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern.
I see what you did there. Well played. Please check out Rapid Survival at rapidsurvival.com. You can get me there on the live chat. Well, of course, you're buying some prepper gear. You can also email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. So thanks for joining us this evening. And until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.